Breaking tonight, the British Prime Minister has just crossed the single most dangerous red line in our constitutional history. On camera, in front of witnesses, he launched a direct attack on his own king. Not criticism, not frustration, a declaration of political war. And what King Charles did next has pushed Britain to the edge of a constitutional cliff, a moment so explosive it could split this country straight down the middle. 3 weeks ago, quietly, without fanfare, His Majesty invited Nigel Farage to Windsor Castle. This wasn't the usual tea and smiles routine. No photographers, no courtiers hovering in the background. A private 2-hour meeting behind closed doors. A meeting that stunned the political establishment because the palace never, ever summons the most controversial man in Britain unless something is deeply wrong. And then something even more shocking surfaced. A leaked document, a full Reform UK strategy paper titled Restoring Britain's Democratic Foundation. Page after page accusing Parliament of betraying voters, trampling public consent and hollowing out the very system meant to keep Britain stable. And then came the moment everything changed. Farage asked about the country's direction. The King paused, leaned back and said 12 words that detonated Westminster like dynamite. Perhaps it's time for fresh thinking. The current path seems unsustainable. 12 words. That's it. No speech, no agenda, but enough to trigger the most explosive political crisis Britain has seen in centuries. If this story matters to you, if you care about where this country is heading, tap subscribe right now, because what happens next decides whether Britain stays united or fractures beyond repair. The meeting was supposed to stay sealed forever. Royal protocol demands silence. Neutrality. The Crown survives by staying above the storm. But 48 hours later, the story was everywhere. Blasted across front pages, pushed into evening bulletins, whispered through Parliament like wildfire. Someone leaked it, and when that leak hit Downing Street, Keir Starmer snapped in a way no Prime Minister has snapped in living memory. Inside Downing Street, witnesses say chaos erupted the moment Starmer saw the report. Not irritation, not confusion, fury, a kind of cold, boiling outrage that stunned even his closest allies. He paced the room like a man possessed, slamming briefing papers down so hard they ricocheted across the cabinet table. Advisers went silent. Ministers stared at the floor, too afraid to breathe. Even Angela Rayner, who has survived decades of Labour infighting, later whispered to colleagues that she'd never seen him like that. Then came the moment that turned a crisis into a constitutional earthquake. Starmer slammed his fist onto the table and shouted words no British Prime Minister has uttered in centuries. If Charles wants to play politics, I'll show him how the game is played. The monarchy serves Parliament, not the other way around. He's forgotten his place. The room froze. Some ministers later said they felt physically sick because this wasn't behind-the-scenes tension. This wasn't a private disagreement. This was open rebellion from the elected head of government against the Crown itself. And Starmer wasn't finished. 300 years of constitutional nonsense, he screamed. Old men in fancy clothes playing dress-up while the country burns. This is 2025, not 1725. If he wants a fight, he's got one. With those words, Starmer crossed the Rubicon, the unwritten rule of British stability that prime ministers may grumble, negotiate, argue, but never publicly attack the Crown, evaporated in seconds. And the moment that line was crossed, Britain erupted. Social media detonated. Hashtags like Defend the Crown and Starmer the Republican surged to #1 globally. Memes of Starmer dressed as Oliver Cromwell, the man who executed King Charles IX, flooded every corner of the internet. TikTok, Insta, Reddit, YouTube, all ablaze. But the shockwave didn't come from Conservatives. It came from Labour's own heartlands. Lifelong Labour voters began turning on Starmer with a fury he never imagined. The betrayal wasn't political. It was emotional, cultural, generational, and the polls that followed. They didn't just hurt Labour, they annihilated them. 36 hours after Starmer's outburst, the first YouGov poll dropped, and Westminster decided descended into panic. 73% of the country believed he'd gone too far. Not a slim majority, a landslide. A supermajority that spanned age, region, and party loyalty. Labour's support collapsed from 42% to 28% in a single day, the fastest collapse recorded in modern British polling. Even worse, the heartlands revolted. Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, cities that had stood with Labour through war, recession and austerity, swung against Starmer with brutal efficiency. And here's where the devastation hit home. Nearly half of Labour voters said they were considering switching to Nigel Farage's Reform UK. Not as protest, as preference, as allegiance, as identity. This wasn't a bad headline. It was political self-destruction. Inside Labour HQ, MPs formed secret WhatsApp groups with innocent names like communications and strategy, but inside they were discussing something far darker, a coup. Whispers became conversations, conversations became planning, planning became countdown. The first domino to fall was Transport Secretary Louise Hay, after what insiders called a screaming match that shook the walls. She stormed out and resigned. Her resignation letter leaked instantly, almost certainly by her own allies. I cannot serve a leader who holds contempt for the crown and for the millions of Britons who cherish it. Within hours, 2 junior ministers walked, then another and another. But the silence that terrified Westminster came from Rachel Reeves, usually Starmer's fiercest defender. She refused interviews, refused statements, refused to appear in public, and everyone knew what that meant. Angela Rayner, meanwhile, wasn't defending him. She was touring Parliament, meeting MPs quietly, soothing nerves, acting like a leader in waiting. Veterans of Westminster saw it instantly. A leadership contest was forming in real time. And as Labour imploded, one man stayed perfectly calm, Nigel Farage. While Labour tore itself apart, Farage stood before a row of Union Jacks and delivered the most disciplined message of his political life. No attacks, no gloating, no mockery, just calm, controlled patriotism. While others attack our king, he said, voice steady, we defend him. While others forget Britain's traditions, we honour them. While others tear down what generations built, we stand firm. The contrast could not have been more devastating. Labour looked hysterical. The Conservatives looked irrelevant. Reform UK looked presidential. And the public responded with an earthquake. Reform UK membership surged 400% in 3 days. Donations poured in from people who had never supported a political party before. Former Labour loyalists crossed the aisle overnight. For the first time in British history, Nigel Farage wasn't just a disruptor. He wasn't a protest vote. He was a viable contender for number 10. The new polls confirmed what nobody believed possible. Conservatives, 32%, Labour, 26% Reform UK, 24%, a three-way knife fight for control of Britain. And through it all, King Charles said nothing. Not a word, not a whisper, no statement from the palace, no leaked rebuttal. Just total, perfect royal silence. But that silence became the most powerful weapon in the crisis. Every hour the king stayed quiet, Starmer looked more unhinged, more unstable, more out of touch with the people he claimed to represent. Constitutional scholars began praising Charles for executing a masterclass in royal strategy, fighting not with speeches, but with dignity. Behind the scenes, insiders said the king felt genuinely wounded, that after a lifetime preparing for the throne, he now faced the most personal, most humiliating attack a monarch had endured in generations. But outwardly, he gave nothing away. And that contrast only deepened the public's fury with the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, Britain itself was cracking apart. Protesters filled the streets outside Parliament day and night, royalists facing off against Republicans, police forming human shields, fights breaking out, flags torn, effigies burned. Britain wasn't divided anymore. It was splintering, and behind closed doors, the coup against Starmer reached critical mass. Inside Westminster, MPs no longer whispered about replacing Starmer. They openly prepared for it. WhatsApp groups evolved from panic chats into full coup command centres. Names of successors spread like wildfire. Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, Yvette Cooper, Wes Streeting. Even David Lammy emerged as a dark horse candidate. Starmer's grip on power didn't slip. It vanished. He became a prime minister in title only, surrounded by advisers, afraid to tell him the truth, abandoned by allies who'd already begun measuring the curtains in Downing Street. And still, King Charles remained silent. That silence echoed across the nation like a slow, steady drumbeat. Every day it continued, the public mood hardened. Charles looked dignified, calm, above the chaos. Starmer looked desperate, volatile and dangerously out of control. Rumours exploded across political circles, and that Charles had held emergency meetings with senior royals. That abdication was discussed. That ancient constitutional powers, unused for centuries, were quietly being reviewed. Nobody knew what was true, but the uncertainty alone pushed Britain into darker, deeper waters. And now, the country stands on the edge of a moment we haven't faced since the English Civil War. A Prime Minister who declared war on his king, a king who refuses to bow to political intimidation, and a rising outsider, Nigel Farage, positioning himself as the defender of the crown, of tradition, of Britain itself. Who survives this? Does Starmer cling to power? Does Charles strike back with real authority? Does Farage seize the moment and become Britain's next Prime Minister? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to see how this crisis ends, hit subscribe right now, because in the next 72 hours, one of these three men will make a move that changes Britain forever.